It's 4 o'clock in Nanaimo, 7 o'clock in Thunder Bay, and 8:30 in Gander. This is Canada Tonight. Big money. Donald Trump is ordered to pay a whopping $83 million U.S. in his New York defamation trial. Atmospheric river. Flood watches are issued as BC braces for almost a foot of rain. Meeting at the intersection tonight, Goldie Gamari, Laura Stone, and Carmen Wong to discuss BC's new restrictions on cell phones in the classroom, that Taylor Swift deepfake gone viral, and the backlash over Barbie's snub at the Oscars. Plus, on tonight's Spotlight, Avril Lavigne gets personal and takes a trip down memory lane back to where it all started in Napanee, Ontario.
From the Canadian Broadcasting Centre, this is Canada Tonight with Travis Dhanraj.
Also on this Friday, we're tracking a ruling from the top court at the United Nations. Israel is ordered to take steps to prevent a genocide in its war in Gaza, but stopped short of ordering a ceasefire. Reaction in 5 minutes. Plus, the Archbishop of Quebec is temporarily stepping down from his duties following allegations of sexual assault. And Masters of the Air. We take a look at the new war drama brought to you by Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg. In New York, where a Manhattan jury has handed down a decision in former U.S. President Donald Trump's defamation case. Trump has been ordered to pay $83.3 million in damages to writer E. Jean Carroll for defaming her after she accused him of sexual assault in 2019. For more on this verdict, I'm joined right now in studio by Tricia Kindleman. So Tricia, this payment is even more than what Carroll was asking for. Let's go through the details here.
Yeah, it is just a staggering number, like you said, that $83.3 million. So $18.3 million of that is compensatory damages. So that's compensating E. Jean Carroll for everything that she's been through. $65 million of that is punitive damages. So that is essentially punishing Donald Trump, $65 million worth of it, totaling that $83.3 million that the jury decided that Donald Trump is going to have to owe Carroll. So in a statement today, Carroll has already said that this is a great victory for every woman who stands up when she's been knocked down, and a huge defeat for every bully who has tried to keep a woman down. So we also heard from Carroll's attorney, Roberta Kaplan, who has said that this verdict shows that no one is above the law. It's been an emotional journey for the former advice columnist, as she's been battling with Trump for years now, since their encounters in 1996 in a department store in New York City. Kaplan also went ahead and thanked the jury and praised Carroll for standing up to what she called was a bully. And Donald Trump has, or the jury decided that Donald Trump has damaged her reputation, and that was by calling her a liar after she accused him of a sexual assault. This jury made up, interestingly, too, by a 7-man and 2-women jury. The trial was attended regularly by Trump this time. He actually left abruptly during Carroll's lawyers' closing arguments today. He did return, but was not in the courthouse as the jury gave their final verdict. Carroll, though, was there, and reporters inside the courthouse say that she was smiling as that verdict was read today.
Okay, so that's the reaction from E. Jean Carroll. What about what Trump's team is saying?
Yeah, well, I think no shock that they're not happy about this. As mentioned, Trump wasn't in the courthouse when that verdict was read out, but he had made his exit just shortly before that, and those who were at the scene said that he was muttering under his breath that this is no longer America. He did take to Truth Social, though, where he posted a full statement on there that was talking about how he fully rejects these findings and does expect that they will be appealing, and his lawyer actually confirmed that. Here's more from what she had to say at the courthouse.
I have sat on trial after trial for months in this state, the state of New York. Attorney General Letitia James, and now this. Weeks. Why? Because President Trump is leading in the polls, and now we see what you get in New York. So don't get it twisted, whoever asked me that question. I am so proud to stand with President Trump.
So now this jury was only asked to determine how much Trump would have to pay Carroll. It was already determined that he's liable for the assault and for these previous actions. So really it was just the amount that was to be determined today. And as you heard Trump's lawyer mention there, this is all happening as they're careening towards that November election date.
Yeah.
We've seen in the past, though, when Trump has had these sort of legal dramas, it almost galvanizes him and his supporters. So it will be interesting to see how this continues to play out with, again, another appeal looming from Trump's team.
Yeah, a lot of political fallout from this. We will see. Tricia Kindleman joining us on this Friday night in studio with the breaking news. Thanks, Tricia.
Thanks, Travis.
Well, the other big story that we're following this evening is the United Nations top court is ordering Israel to take steps aimed at preventing further death and destruction in Gaza.
This order means that the court recognized the gravity of the situation and was convinced by South Africa's compelling presentation. It means that the cries and suffering of our people in Gaza have been heard in the great hall of justice.
The much anticipated ruling stopped short of calling for a ceasefire, but says Israel must do all it can to prevent genocide and allow basic humanitarian aid into Gaza. Though the decision is legally binding, there's no way for the court to enforce it, and Israel's prime minister still appears defiant.
The charge of genocide leveled against Israel is not only false, it's outrageous. And decent people everywhere should reject it. Israel will continue to defend itself against Hamas, a genocidal terror organization.
Today's ruling is only temporary, and Israel will be called upon next month to report on actions it's taken to prevent genocide. They're calling on the court to throw out the case. However, the panel is going to reserve judgment. Despite not fulfilling their demand for a ceasefire, South African officials are pleased with today's orders.
Israel cannot be accepted from complying with its international obligation, and we are hopeful that they will be compliant with the court order. This case is about the children and the vulnerable women and the elderly of Gaza. The people of Gaza, I do believe that this for them is a victory.
In addition to its orders for Israel, the court is also calling on Hamas to release the hostages they're holding from the October 7th attacks. So what is next was next in the war between Israel and Hamas? Joining me now is Michael Becker of Trinity College, Dublin. He is also a former associate legal officer at the International Court of Justice. Michael, thank you so much for joining us tonight here on Canada Tonight. I want to start with your reaction to today's decision.
Well, thanks for having me. I thought that the decision by the court today was about as good an order as South Africa could have reasonably expected to get, even if they may have hoped for more. The court really emphasized in the decision the gravity of the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. That was really the point of emphasis. And it was pretty powerful, I thought, to hear Judge Donoghue, the president of the court, reading out some of this information from UN reports and official assessments of the situation on the ground in Gaza and actually putting that into the record that the court was developing in its decision today.
So what are the next legal steps here for both sides following this ruling?
Right. So the court first made that really important threshold decision that provisional measures, this kind of emergency interim relief was warranted, and then went ahead and decided to order Israel to do certain things, including take actions to prevent anything that could be considered genocide from taking place, and also to take all measures within its power to ensure the effective delivery of humanitarian assistance now. So there will now be greater scrutiny on Israel to see whether Israel is going to comply with those two key components of the decision. And as we heard, Israel is going to have to report back to the court within 1 month to explain what it's been doing to implement the court's order.
So in reality, is this going to make any difference for the people in Gaza, or do you think this is just a symbolic act?
I wouldn't just call it a symbolic act. I think it's quite important at one level because of this threshold determination the court had to make. This idea that South Africa's claims are at least plausible. The court didn't make any determinations about whether what's happened so far actually meets the legal definition of genocide, but this was about saying that South Africa did enough to establish that the Palestinian population of Gaza does face a real and serious risk of something that might, down the road, be found to be genocide. And so that in itself, I think, changes the narrative a little bit and puts considerably more pressure on Israel to moderate its conduct in some way. It's absolutely true that the court can't go out there and kind of make sure that its orders are implemented on its own. It has to rely on other actors in the international system to do that. And Israel can come out, as we've already heard, and reject the decision, attack the legitimacy of the court and all that. But the fact that Israel's public statements are disavowing what the court has said doesn't necessarily mean that behind the scenes, Israel isn't actually going to be looking at ways to moderate its behavior, to change the course of conduct in ways that could actually improve the situation.
Okay, if that does not happen, though, what are the potential consequences for Israel if they don't follow the ICJ's order?
Well, there's a few different things that could happen. Other states may now feel emboldened or under pressure themselves to put more diplomatic pressure on Israel to act. But, you know, the more that Israel defies this order or doesn't make any effort to show that it is acting in good faith to indeed improve that humanitarian situation on the ground, that's probably number one. Well, Israel will essentially then be handing South Africa more evidence to use against it in this case on the merits as it goes forward. And of course, there's a parallel process that could be taking place as well over at a different court in The Hague. That's the International Criminal Court. And so these two processes are different, but Israel's reaction to this order and how the government decides to go forward with its policy on Gaza is going to have an impact on both of those parallel processes.
Okay, Michael, appreciate your time. That's Michael Becker, who is a former associate legal officer at the International Court of Justice. We've reached him in Dublin tonight. Canada has also responded to the ICJ ruling. Our Olivia Stefanovic has that part of the story from Ottawa this evening. So, Olivia, good evening to you. The Foreign Affairs Minister released a statement. Take us through what she said there.
Well, Travis, this statement from Melanie Joly comes after hours of silence from the federal government. Just to give you a sense of the scene on Parliament Hill, reporters were stationed outside the meeting room of the Liberal caucus all day. The Prime Minister passed by several times but did not stop to react to the findings of the World Court. Now, Joly's statement, when it was eventually released later on today, when this meeting from the Liberal caucus was winding down, it attempts to be essentially as neutral as possible, Travis, and does not outline a clear position from Canada. Joly, in fact, starts her statement by saying that Canada supports the ICJ's work in settling international disputes, and goes on to say, if we can pull it up, that our support for the ICJ does not mean that we accept the premise of the case brought by South Africa, which is accusing Israel of genocide. It is for the ICJ to make a final decision. So clearly, Joly is not trying to place blame on anyone's side here and trying to be, again, as neutral as possible. Joly goes on to say in her statement, Travis, several things that she has said in the past, reiterating several calls, including the fact that, condemning the attack by Hamas on Israel on October 7th, saying that Hamas needs to lay down its weapons, saying that Canada supports Israel, its right to exist and defend itself in accordance with the rule of law. And Joly also expresses concern for the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, the fact that she wants to see more humanitarian aid get into the region. And she also says that Canada continues to support work towards a sustainable ceasefire, a word that was missing from the ICJ ruling that some Liberal MPs wanted to see. The Liberal caucus remains divided on this issue, Travis, but some Liberal MPs did stop to talk about their reaction to these findings earlier today. Let's take a listen.
I respect the decision. It's a disappointment. I've been, since October 20th, publicly calling for a ceasefire along with some of my colleagues. So I think the solution to this conflict, from my humble perspective, has to be political. It will not be military. Thank you.
Yes, I think it's we need to respect the court's rulings. What does that mean for Canada? I mean, in my statement, I always said that it's that is a right forum to look into it, and whatever outcome is, we should render.
I think Canada is a signatory to ICJ. As a signatory, I think it's incumbent on Canada to convince Israel to make sure that they follow what has been said in regards to making sure that civilians are protected, in regards to making sure that humanitarian aid can get in there.
Now, Travis, Ottawa did not say in its statement whether it will try to persuade Israel to abide by the ICJ's findings and follow these provisional measures, something that NDP leader Jagmeet Singh says he wants to see. Singh posted on X, formerly known as Twitter, earlier today that Justin Trudeau must respect the ICJ's decision and immediately urge the government of Israel to comply with provisional measures. Singh also went on to call for more humanitarian aid in Gaza, for Canada to push for a ceasefire, and he says he also wants to see Canada end arms sales to Israel.
And Olivia, we saw earlier what Benjamin Netanyahu had to say about this. What has been the reaction from Israeli officials here?
Well, Israel's ambassador to Canada is vigorously defending his government and his country. And the ambassador appeared on Power and Politics today. He spoke to our colleague David Cochrane, and he actually downplayed the ruling today from the ICJ. He insists that Israel is abiding by international law and defending itself, rightly so. And he actually suggested, Travis, that the ruling today is perhaps a win for Israel. Let's take a listen.
So you see no suggestion that Israel should change its military tactics and its approach inside Gaza based on the findings here and the order to come back in 30 days and explain how you're going to do things differently from a military perspective?
We have to be very clear on what the court said. The court did not say Israel did not do it in the past, please do it in the future. The court said take these issues into consideration. This is exactly what we have been doing.
Now, Power and Politics also interviewed the chief representative of the Palestinian delegation to Canada, who has harsh words for the government of Canada's response to the ICJ's findings, calling this statement from Melanie Joly dehumanizing. Let's take a listen to her response.
I'm shocked and saddened by the statement that I've seen. When you imagine that there are 26,000+ with thousands under the rubble, and this is the reaction on Canada's side.
Now, there are international groups, Travis, who are watching Canada's response closely and urging Canada to take a more active role in this conflict, to not sit on the sidelines. Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International are calling on Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly to both have private and public conversations with Israel to use Canada's leverage to make sure Israel complies with the ICJ's provisional measures.
All right, Olivia Stefanovich with the update for us from our Parliamentary Bureau live tonight. Thanks, Olivia.
You're welcome.
Well, several employees from the United Nations Agency for Palestinian Refugees are being investigated for possible involvement in the October 7th attacks in Israel. The UN says they were provided the information by Israeli authorities.
The Secretary General is horrified by this news and asked Mr. Lazzarini to investigate this matter swiftly and to ensure that any UNRWA employee shown to have participated or abetted in what transpired on October 7th or in any other criminal activity be terminated immediately and referred for potential criminal prosecution.
The UN hasn't disclosed the number of employees allegedly involved in the attacks or the nature of their involvement. According to the U.S. State Department, 12 staff members from UNRWA are being investigated. Germany, the U.S., and the EU have been the biggest donors to the relief agency. Canada and the U.S. now say they won't be providing additional aid until these allegations are addressed. Well, up next on Canada Tonight, why BC says it's restricting phone use in the classroom. We'll take you live to our Vancouver newsroom with the latest. Still in BC, later on the program, parts of that province are under warning. That is because of the threat of flooding. We're back after this. British Columbia is announcing new measures they say will protect young people from online threats. It includes restricting the use of cell phones in schools.
We are introducing public harms legislation, which the Attorney General will talk about, which enables us to claim from the social media companies for the harms that they are causing to our children through their addictive algorithms that they have put together that feed our children a constant stream of more and more extreme content that has been linked to increasing levels of anorexia among girls and boys, increasing anxiety and depression among young people, addictive and obsessive behaviors, and that at a particularly vulnerable age threatens the health and safety of our kids.
Okay, we're live next to Mira Baines, who has been tracking this story for us from our Vancouver newsroom. So Mira, good evening to you. Walk us through these new measures.
Good evening, Travis. So the province actually walked us through 3 concrete actions that they'll be taking. Now one of them is around cell phone usage in schools. There isn't going to be an all-out ban in BC schools to limit the use of cell phones. Basically, they don't want children to be using cell phones during instructional time. And so the provincial government says that it's going to be working with school districts and schools to sort of come up with a new policy, and they want that in place by the fall. Now, the second action that they're taking is already underway. The Intimate Images Protection Act was already passed, and now it's going to be implemented on Monday. And that means people who want intimate images, videos, live streams, and even deep fakes taken down from websites, they can file a complaint or an application through the BC Civil Tribunal. And so using that, they can have those images taken down. Basically, some of these online platforms will be contacted through that to get those images taken down. So that's a big thing that's happening on Monday. And the third thing that the province plans on doing is bringing a new legislation dealing with algorithms, those addictive algorithms that some platforms are using to target children. I want you to take a listen to Premier David Eby.
Can you imagine any other situation in our society where an environment is set up for kids, where a stranger is able to walk in, take pictures of a child, threaten their safety, and the person who is providing that space, the company that is providing that space, says, we have no responsibility here. This is just something that happens.
And I should mention that minors can make their own applications to the BC Civil Tribunal in order to have intimate images taken down without an adult, but they cannot seek compensation. So under this Intimate Images Protection Act, people can seek compensation as well. Platforms can be fined.
And Mira, what more did we hear from the parents of the young boy who was the victim of sextortion?
That's right. They came forward and they told his story, and that's 12-year-old Carson Cleland. His parents said that he was contacted by someone who he thought was a girl his age on Snapchat, and he shared intimate images. He said things took a turn when his son was then threatened. He was asked for money, he was asked for gift cards, and he just panicked and he took his own life. I want you to take a listen to what his mother said, her main message to other kids out there.
Asking these 3 words are probably the hardest thing you'll ever do in your life. But it is life-changing for you and for your loved ones. I need help. We only wish that Carson knew that we loved him more than anything in the world, and that we would do anything to keep him safe.
So their main message there is that kids shouldn't feel embarrassed about coming forward or afraid. A very emotional news conference. And I should mention that, you know, there are a lot of challenges that have been pointed out by even advocates who help shape some of this legislation. And they say that it's very difficult to track down some of the people behind sextortion cases.
All right, Mira Baines for us in our Vancouver newsroom this evening. Thank you, Mira. A reminder that we are going to talk more about this story later in the program at The Intersection. Our guests will also dig into deep fakes flooding social media with explicit images of Taylor Swift. We'll also talk about the big Barbie snub of the Oscars and much more. That's next hour when we meet at the Canada Tonight Intersection. In other news, the Archbishop of Quebec, Cardinal Gérald Lacroix, is temporarily stepping down from his duties. The move follows allegations of sexual assault that were made public yesterday. Those allegations are part of a class action lawsuit and have yet to be tested in court. The plaintiff says the incidents took place in Quebec City in the 1980s when the plaintiff was 17 years old. The Quebec City Diocese says Lacroix denies the allegations and plans to release a personal statement. A Quebec judge has rejected an environmental group's request to stop work on the Northvolt EV battery plant. Work on the multi-million-dollar installation site in Montreal has been halted since January after the injunction request was filed. The group argued the permits of the battery plant were unreasonable and failed to protect wetlands. Canada's Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry reacted to the decision.
I hope Quebecers in their heart feel that this is in line with the values that we want, which is, in Quebec, we've been particularly good in finding ways for the economy and the environment to go together. And for me, this is a flagship project that shows to Quebecers, to our young people, that, you can care about the environment and at the same time do well from an economic perspective. And so I hope people will sit in the broader context and saying why we wanted Northvolt, a Swedish company, close to the environment. They're very close to community, and I hope that at the end, people will see this is a project that will, provide benefits not only now, but for generations to come.
Champagne also said the Northvolt plant helps bring Quebec into Canada's auto sector. Still ahead, an event to mark International Remembrance Holocaust Day was held in Ottawa. We'll show you how they're paying tribute to survivors and victims. And flood watches are in place in areas of BC this weekend. The forecast coming up here on Canada Tonight.
The order then states that the court deems it necessary to emphasize that all parties to the conflict in the Gaza Strip are bound by international humanitarian law.
Revisiting our top story tonight, UN's top court has issued a series of orders for Israel aimed at preventing death and destruction in Gaza. The much anticipated ruling, however, stopped short of calling for a ceasefire. Israel will now need to take steps to prove it is doing everything it can to prevent a genocide, and it must report to the court within a month on what it's doing to uphold the order. People gathered in Ottawa to mark International Holocaust Remembrance Day, paying tribute to survivors and over 6 million Jewish people who were killed.
2 out of every 3 European Jews were murdered by the Nazis and their collaborators during the Holocaust. Hundreds of thousands of Roma and Sinti people, as well as those considered disabled, were also targeted.
Speakers also talked about the importance of Holocaust education and the collective responsibility to share the true history. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre both spoke briefly at the event, reading passages to the crowd. My next guest is a Holocaust survivor. We are joined by Andy Retty. He, just as a toddler, he, along with his mother and grandmother, were forced out of his home in Hungary and sent to a Jewish ghetto. His father, who was sent to a forced labor camp, did not survive. And he joins us now to share some of his story, and we do appreciate that, Mr. Retty. When you look back at that part of your life during the war, what do you remember now?
Well, being a toddler, as you said, I actually have very little memory, but strangely enough, I do have 2 recollections from the ghetto. One of them has to do with the first piece of food that I ever received, because one more day and we would have starved to death.
You know, you grew up, as I said in the intro there, in a family of Holocaust survivors. Can you just tell folks why this day is so important to observe and retell these stories over and over?
It is important because it is the greatest tragedy in humanity. 6 million Jews and 5 million additional other people, as you said at the beginning, Sintis, Romas, Jehovah's Witnesses, were murdered because they were different from the Nazi ideal of what a human being should be. Those who were the enemies of the Nazis were considered under people, not worthwhile living. And I was declared ein Leben nicht wertig, a life not worthwhile living. Well, my life is worthwhile because I'm teaching about the Holocaust. I'm teaching children not to hate.
Yeah. And as you said, you know, you go to classes to tell your story. Why is it so important for you to do that, and what's the impact on those students when they hear your story?
The impact is incredible. I was at Bishop Strong School this morning addressing 800 people, and one of the nicest cards in my 25 years of teaching about the Holocaust was given to me this morning, because in my presentation I include the fact that I'd like to think that I make a difference. And this card from a teacher said that it was inspirational and I am making a difference. And she is asking me to continue, which I'd like to do if my health continues.
Mr. Retty, you know, each year, unfortunately, there are less and less survivors to tell these stories. What's your hope for future generations, and how do we really keep these stories alive to commemorate this day?
There are a number of ways to do it, but the most important thing is for people to learn how to think for themselves, how to separate fact from fiction, how not to follow another one just because they said so. Now, in my presentation, I usually refer to a book that my mother wrote, and it is called An Ordinary Woman in Extraordinary Times. And I have a copy of that book. This is an award-winning book, was taught at York University for 10 years. And in this book, my mother talks about the fact that she cannot forget what happened, but she can't forgive it. In other words, you cannot live with hatred. You cannot live with hatred in your heart. And if we teach young students to think for themselves and to learn for themselves, then we as Holocaust survivors have accomplished our mission.
It's a powerful message, and I certainly appreciate you bringing it here to us and across the country on Canada Tonight. That's Andy Rethi. He's a Holocaust survivor, and he joined us from here in Toronto. National Security Advisor to the Prime Minister, Jody Thomas, says India is now cooperating with Canada in the case of a Sikh separatist leader who was murdered in British Columbia last June. Trudeau claimed the Indian government may have been connected to the death of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. Chief Political Correspondent Rosemary Barton sat down with Thomas to talk about relations between the two countries. Here's a bit of that.
We know more about the American situation because of their judicial process. We don't unseal an indictment in the same way. They were a little more advanced. They were investigating conspiracy, were investigating a murder, and the RCMP is being very careful to ensure that every T is crossed and I dotted to have a successful charge, package, and prosecution.
And you think that will happen?
I do think that will happen. They are, of course, independent, but they have been working pretty diligently at this.
You went to India twice last year to talk about these allegations. Were you surprised that the conversations led to such a strong reaction from India, that they were upset with the allegations, that they, sort of retaliated in diplomatic ways against Canada?
I think the reaction was really unfortunate, and I think it's counterproductive because it's harmed the people-to-people relationship between Canada and India. We need diplomats there to issue visas and to execute programs on behalf of Canadians and Indians. And so I think the reaction was unfortunate. The size of it, yes, was a bit of a surprise. I think we're working back towards a healthier relationship.
And you can watch that whole interview this Sunday at 10 a.m. Eastern on Rosemary Barton Live. Well, just ahead, our weather specialist and film critic have their eyes to the sky. In BC, Darius is watching for rain, major rain that could cause flooding, an atmospheric flooding issue. And Eli stops by for his review on Masters of the Air. That is all coming up next here on Canada Tonight. Stick with us. It's going to be a messy weekend in parts of British Columbia with a strong risk of flooding. Let's head to Vancouver right now and science and climate specialist Darius Mandavi. So Darius, this heavy rain forecast, how much are we expecting and what areas really need to watch out for this?
Well, fortunately, the first thing I want to say is even though there is an atmospheric river, this is not likely to be a repeat of the 2021 event back in November, or in November 2021, because in that case, the atmospheric river seemed to be heading further south and really hit Vancouver and the Fraser Valley much harder. And in this case, the atmospheric river seems to be moving further north and will instead mostly affect central Vancouver Island and then the Sea to Sky Highway that connects Vancouver to Whistler and the entire Howe Sound region. So a little bit of good news there potentially, but locally we're looking at rainfall amounts anywhere from 200 millimeters on the west coast of Vancouver Island, up at highest elevations on the island up to 400 millimeters. For Vancouver, it's looking closer like anywhere from 50 to 80 millimeters by the water, or up to 100 or even more than that, closer to or at higher elevations. Sorry. Here you can look at the first signs that we're getting of that system move in. It's sort of a break off of an atmospheric river that's already heading into further south in Washington and Oregon. Now, if we take a look, you can actually see a lot of that atmospheric moisture. This is not precipitation. This is all the moisture that the atmosphere is holding. You can see a lot of it heading our way, and that's the big hit that happens early on Sunday, and then it continues into Monday, and then we may have another wave that comes on Wednesday, although it is a little bit early to say. It is a strong possibility, and Environment Canada is warning of that already. Now, if we take a look at our freezing levels, it's also bringing a lot of warmth. This is a Pineapple Express, we call it, an atmospheric river that comes from the tropics around Hawaii, brings a lot of warmth as well, meaning freezing levels will be very high. We're going to see rain on most mountain tops, except for the very highest ones, meaning it could be bad news for our snowpack, and that includes Vancouver's local mountains. You can see lots of rain there, not really any snow to speak of. And then in terms of accumulation, here's what we have over the next 24 hours. And then if we continue to roll this forward, you can see some very, very heavy accumulation over the next few days, especially for parts of the island and Howe Sound, as you can see there, Travis.
Okay. Darius, appreciate it. That's science and climate specialist Darius Mandavi in Vancouver.
So you happy?
A girl worth writing to is hard to find.
That's a sneak peek of Masters of the Air, the new Second World War series premiered today. It's a sequel of the hugely successful miniseries Band of Brothers. And of course, we can't talk about new releases without our Eli Glasner. And Eli, this comes with 2 decades after the show Band of Brothers. Yeah. What's the storyline about here?
Well, I mean, behind the scenes, you got Steven Spielberg, you got your Tom Hanks. We know they love these military stories. They did the Brothers, they did the Pacific, they've done the Marines, they've done the Army. Now we get the Airmen. And this is inspired by a book about what was called the Bloody 100th. This was the 100 bombing group, the American Air Force. In the later days of the war, we're talking 43, 44, they would take, there you see them, the Flying Fortress, these B-17 bombers, and they're heading off to Nazi Germany to annihilate that infrastructure. But here's the thing, the Brits, they're flying at night, because it's safer. They can't see their targets. They're bombing indiscriminately. The Americans want to be precise, which is a good thing, but that means down there, they can see exactly what's happening up in the sky. The casualty rates, and this is really what attracted them to this story, the casualty rates of this air squadron, we're talking chances of survival, 1 in 5. 77% chance of casualty. So if you're heading into the plane for your 5th flight, chances are you're not even making it home. So who are these men, and how do you get back in that cockpit after you barely survived the last time? That is what this is about. Let's take a closer look.
We came from every corner of the country with a common purpose. Go, 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 go! To bring the war to Hitler's doorstep. Daylight missions.
It's a bit of a throwback. This is a little old-fashioned, a little nostalgic, certainly patriotic, uncomplicated, you might say. And if you don't quite believe me, I'm going to treat you to a little selection of the very brassy, very sentimental opening theme. Take a look.
Okay.
feel like the producers, they just went like, write the most heroic thing ever, and then add extra trumpets and the montage of the wistful pilots looking off in the distance. So this is not like a complicated interrogation of America's role in the war. This is kind of a throwback in a way.
Okay, so Band of Brothers, as we know, launched a lot of careers. Any familiar faces here?
You're going to spot a couple, but let me run through the main characters. So we got Major Gail Clemens. He is nicknamed Buck. And then we got Major Egan, who is nicknamed Bucky. So we got Buck and Bucky, which is kind of ridiculous, but they're very different. Clemens is kind of the James Dean type. He's strong but silent, amazing leader, amazing pilot, always has the toothpick hanging out of his mouth. And then Egan, he's a rabble-rouser. This guy is just a mess. He's an amazing pilot, a good commander, but you go to the bar, he's either drinking or dancing or somehow doing both. Let's take another look. We're going to start. You're going to see Egan. He's the one with the little pencil mustache, and then it continues.
Got it.
We're getting through this, even if the odds are stacked against us.
First time in the sawmill, boys. Let's rack them up and knock them down.
So there you go. Now, I knew Elvis was drafted. I didn't know he had his wings. That is Austin Butler.
Right.
He is playing Clemens. Now, there's been reports that Butler actually hired a dialect coach to help him remove his Elvis Presley affectations.
Right.
I hope he didn't pay a lot, because there's a lot of Presley hanging around there. But I want to mention the other actor playing Egan. He is actually a British actor named Callum Turner. And he played an American. I was fully convinced because the accent is so perfect and so specific. But the way this show works, that's just a little bit of, like, we've got so many other characters. You have Babyface and Bubbles and Rosie, and it is a lot. And I will say that when they have their masks on, because they're up in the air, they need oxygen, this is all you see. And so sometimes just a bunch of like boys yelling, hey, go over there, 6 o'clock. I don't know who I'm seeing. It can be confusing.
Okay, so real quick, overall, what did you think?
So it looks fantastic. This is what I call dadcore. This is like comfort food, right? This wonderful throwback, kind of like Band of Brothers. I love the aerial scenes. In a way, it's not so much about the dogfights. It's about being in that airplane. It's more like a submarine, right? In that you're just stuck in this place. You just have your brothers to depend on. Everything outside the plane is danger and death, explosions and flak, and you're just praying you can make it to that point, drop the bombs, and come back. But because there's so many characters, each plane is 10 crew, and then you have multiple planes, a whole squadron, so characters come and go, and I didn't have enough to help me really invest in what's happening. But if you stick with it, I'd say around episode 5 or 6, it starts to get better. I'm still watching, so I would recommend it.
All right.
And I'm going to give it 3 stars out of 5.
3 stars out of 5. Eli Glasner, thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, we are 6 months away from the opening ceremony of the 2024 Paris Summer Olympics. The Games are billed as the People's Olympics, but they could turn out to be anything but. Tony Waterman explains.
Officials have assured that the infrastructure for the Summer Olympics will be completed on time. Things like athlete housing and event stadiums. And in fact, a lot of the buildings that are being used are buildings that already existed. Not many of them have been built from the ground up. In terms of transport, the Paris mayor has warned that the metro won't be ready for the millions of spectators expected during the Games. Even in the best of times, public transport is overcrowded and plagued by delays. But one of the biggest challenges is actually here at the Seine, the river that winds through Paris. The opening ceremony and some of the swimming events are meant to take place right here in these notoriously polluted waters. It's not raining much today, but when it does, sewage backs up into the river, and that spikes bacteria levels. Officials have been working for more than 5 years to try and fix the problem. They are building these massive storage tanks right under the river that will hold this sewage. But if it rains, officials say that some of the events may have to be postponed and that there is no plan B. The other major unknown at this point is around the biggest priority, and that is safety. Just to secure the opening ceremonies, 30,000 law enforcement officers are needed, and the government has called for all hands on deck. But police officers are threatening to strike if their demands around bonuses, guaranteed holidays, and child care assistance aren't met. Those negotiations are still underway. Another thing officials have to worry about: heat. The games come at the apex of summer, and climate scientists are already warning of the possibility of a heat wave, with temperatures topping 39 degrees Celsius or about 102 degrees Fahrenheit. Olympic organizers say that they are taking this scenario into consideration on top of everything else. Tony Waterman for CBC News, Paris, France.
Hard to think about a heat wave right now. Well, stick around. There's plenty more ahead here on Canada Tonight. Our intersection panel will dive into some of the day's big topics, including BC's new measures they say will help protect young people from online threats. Plus, in the spotlight tonight, Avril Lavigne. That conversation coming up next hour on Canada Tonight. It is 9 o'clock in Labrador City, 8 o'clock in North Bay, and 6 p.m. in Cranbrook. This is Canada Tonight. Israel has been ordered to take steps to prevent a genocide in its war in Gaza, but stopped short of ordering a ceasefire. Donald Trump has been ordered to pay $83.3 million U.S. for defaming writer E. Jean Carroll. And Avril Lavigne is in the spotlight. My conversation with the Canadian singer coming up. But our top story at this hour, the United Nations top court is ordering Israel to take steps aimed at preventing further death and destruction in Gaza.
This order means that the court recognized the gravity of the situation and was convinced by South Africa's compelling presentation. It means that the cries and suffering of our people in Gaza have been heard in the Great Hall of Justice.
The much-anticipated ruling stopped short of calling for a ceasefire, but says Israel must do all it can to prevent genocide and allow basic humanitarian aid into Gaza. Though the decision is legally binding, there is no way for the court to enforce it, and Israel's prime minister still appears defiant.
The charge of genocide leveled against Israel is not only false, it's outrageous, and decent people everywhere should reject it. Israel will continue to defend itself against Hamas, a genocidal terror organization.
Today's ruling is only temporary, and Israel will be called upon next month to report on actions it's taken to prevent genocide. They're calling on the court to throw out the case. However, the panel is going to reserve judgment. Despite not fulfilling their demand for a ceasefire, South African officials are pleased with today's orders.
Israel cannot be accepted from complying with its international obligation, and we are hopeful that they will be compliant with the court order. This case is about the children and the vulnerable women and the elderly of Gaza, the people of Gaza. I do believe that this for them is a victory.
In addition to its orders for Israel, the court is also calling on Hamas to release the hostages they are holding from the October 7th attacks. Now, to discuss what's next in the war between Israel and Hamas, we spoke earlier with Michael Becker. He's a former associate legal officer at the International Court of Justice. Becker says today's ruling represents the best outcome for people hoping to hold Israel accountable.
I thought that the decision by the court today was about as good an order as South Africa could have reasonably expected to get, even if they may have hoped for more. The court really emphasized in the decision the gravity of the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. That was really the point of emphasis. And it was pretty powerful, I thought, to hear Judge Donoghue, the president of the court, reading out some of this information from UN reports and official assessments of the situation on the ground in Gaza, and actually putting that into the record that the court was developing in its decision today.
So what are the next legal steps here for both sides following this ruling?
Right. So the court first made that really important threshold decision that provisional measures, this kind of emergency interim relief, was warranted, and then went ahead and decided to order Israel to do certain things, including take actions to prevent anything that could be considered genocide from taking place, and also to take all measures within its power to ensure the effective delivery of humanitarian assistance now. So there will now be greater scrutiny on Israel to see whether Israel is going to comply with those two key components of the decision. And as we heard, Israel is going to have to report back to the court within 1 month to explain what it's been doing to implement the court's order.
So in reality, is this going to make any difference for the people in Gaza, or do you think this is just a symbolic act?
I wouldn't just call it a symbolic act. I think it's quite important at one level because of this threshold determination the court had to make. This idea that South Africa's claims are at least plausible. The court didn't make any determinations about whether what's happened so far actually meets the legal definition of genocide, but this was about saying that South Africa did enough to establish that the Palestinian population of Gaza does face a real and serious risk of something that might, down the road, be found to be genocide. And so that in itself, I think, changes the narrative a little bit and puts considerably more pressure on Israel to moderate its conduct in some way. It's absolutely true that the court can't go out there and kind of make sure that its orders are implemented on its own. It has to rely on other actors in the international system to do that. And Israel can come out, as we've already heard, and reject the decision, attack the legitimacy of the court and all that. But the fact that Israel's public statements are disavowing what the court has said doesn't necessarily mean that behind the scenes, Israel isn't actually going to be looking at ways to moderate its behavior, to change the course of conduct in ways that could actually improve the situation.
Okay, if that does not happen, though, what are the potential consequences for Israel if they don't follow the ICJ's order?
Well, there's a few different things that could happen. Other states may now feel emboldened or under pressure themselves to put more diplomatic pressure on Israel to act. But, you know, the more that Israel defies this order or doesn't make any effort to show that it is acting in good faith to indeed improve that humanitarian situation on the ground, that's probably number one. Well, Israel will essentially then be handing South Africa more evidence to use against it in this case on the merits as it goes forward. And of course, there's a parallel process that could be taking place as well over at a different court in The Hague. That's the International Criminal Court. And so these two processes are different, but Israel's reaction to this order and how the government decides to go forward with its policy on Gaza is going to have an impact on both of those parallel processes.
Okay, Michael, appreciate your time. That's Michael Becker, who is a former associate legal officer at the International Court of Justice. We've reached him in Dublin tonight. Several employees from the United Nations Agency for Palestinian Refugees are being investigated for possible involvement in the October 7th attacks in Israel. The UN says they were provided the information by Israeli authorities.
The Secretary General is horrified by this news and asked Mr. Lazzarini to investigate this matter swiftly and to ensure that any UNRWA employee shown to have participated or abetted in what transpired on October 7th or in any other criminal activity be terminated immediately and referred for potential criminal prosecution.
The United Nations hasn't disclosed the number of employees allegedly involved in the attacks or the nature of their involvement. Now, according to the U.S. State Department, 12 staff members from UNRWA are being investigated. Germany, the U.S., and the EU have been the biggest donors to the relief agency. Canada and the U.S. now say they won't be providing additional aid until the allegations are addressed. Well, to New York now, where former President Donald Trump has been hit with another legal setback. He was ordered by a jury to pay over $80 million U.S. in damages to columnist E. Jean Carroll in a defamation case. Let's bring in our Tricia Kindleman, who has been following this story for us. Tricia, this is a whopping number here. Let's talk about it. Let's break things down.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a staggering number, totaling $83.3 million. 18.3 of that million-dollar settlement is compensatory damages, according to the jury's verdict there. And then Trump must also pay Carroll $65 million in punitive damages. So now we have heard from E. Jean Carroll this evening. She released a statement earlier through her lawyer. And in that statement, she has said that this is a great victory for every woman who stands up when she's been knocked down and a huge defeat for every bully who has tried to keep a woman down. Her lawyer also responding this evening saying that the verdict shows that no one is above the law. She went on to call Donald Trump a bully as well and praised Carroll for standing up to him and thanked the jury for their service. Now, again, that jury awarding more than $83 million. Now, this is due to damage to E. Jean Carroll's reputation after Trump called her a liar when she accused him of sexual assault. Now, there was another previous case that already determined he's liable for that incident. But this case was just about how much they had to pay, or how much he had to pay, rather. And also, I can tell you that there was reporters in the courtroom today as this verdict was being read out. Donald Trump was not there. He had left abruptly earlier in the day, did return for his lawyer's final closing statement, but then left before this verdict was read out. Carroll, though, was in the courtroom, and reporters say that she was smiling as this verdict was read out this afternoon.
Okay, so Donald Trump leaves the courtroom early, doesn't come back, but we are hearing reaction from his team, at least?
Yes, actually, we've heard from Trump and his team.
Got it.
So Trump took to the Truth social media platform that he has created. Now, he went on there and he said that basically this is absolutely ridiculous. Quote, I fully disagree with both verdicts and will be appealing this whole Biden-directed witch hunt focused on me and the Republican Party. Now, we should say that there's been no evidence uncovered that Biden or any of the Democratic Party may have had anything to do with these legal situations, but it does seem to be one of those statements that Trump likes to make along the way. way. It tends to galvanize his supporters, much like we've seen some of his other sort of legal dramas lead to more support and vocal support from his base. But we can say that this is going to be appealed. Here's more from his lawyer just outside the courthouse this afternoon.
I have sat on trial after trial for months in this state, the state of New York. Attorney General Letitia James, and now this. Weeks. Why? Because President Trump is leading in the polls, and now we see what you get in New York. So don't get it twisted, whoever asked me that question. I am so proud to stand with President Trump.
So again, we will see appeals in this case, and we should mention too that this is all happening with the backdrop of that election in the background. November is not far away when it comes to legal timelines. It can take a long time, so it will be interesting to see how this continues to unfold leading up to that November 2024 election.
Absolutely, and if he is the Republican nominee, the juggling act, because that's not the only case. There are a lot of them. Okay, Tricia Kittleman here in studio with us on this Friday. Our thanks to you.
Thanks, Travis.
And coming up, we're going to be talking more about this Trump reaction and how it's going to impact him, because the Intersection panel is coming up. We'll also be discussing the dangers of artificial intelligence after AI-generated explicit images of Taylor Swift put the issue under a microscope. And did Barbie's star, lead actress, and director deserve an Oscar nomination? We'll dig into the controversy around the big Oscar snub. That's coming up next on Canada Tonight.
The order then states that the court deems it necessary to emphasize that all parties to the conflict in the Gaza Strip are bound by international humanitarian law.
Revisiting our top story tonight, UN's top court has issued a series of orders for Israel aimed at preventing death and destruction in Gaza. The much-anticipated ruling, however, stopped short of calling for a ceasefire. Israel will now need to take steps to prove it's doing everything it can to prevent genocide, and it must report to the court within a month on what's being done to uphold the order. All right, it's now time for the intersection. Let me say that again. The part of the show where we unpack some of the hot topics trending in Canada tonight. Meeting at the intersection tonight, we have Goldie Gamari, Ontario Progressive MPP and former TikTok star, Laura Stone, Queen's Park reporter with the Globe and Mail, and Carmen Wong, former journalist and Liberal political staffer and co-founder of Kapow Communications. And welcome to all of you. We're going to start with a topic that is resonating on social media. Artificial intelligence. Now, despite its efforts, it's got its darker side. You know, they've got the benefits here, but it's also got its darker side. And X, also known as Twitter, was recently flooded with explicit AI-generated photos of singer Taylor Swift, with one post being viewed 45 million times. Okay, Carmen, I'm going to start with you on this one. Is there anything that X/Twitter needs to do to prevent getting these posts kind of proliferating and it turning viral?
Yeah, they definitely do. There's a responsibility for the platforms to have a policy. I mean, I think as technology is being used, technology can also be used to solve this problem, to identify those images and get them taken off of those platforms. The problem is that they crop up so fast, it's kind of like whack-a-mole. You know, they spread so quickly with just a click of a button. But I would just say on this issue also that it's not just big celebrities that are victims. There are, you know, there's just a story in Winnipeg of high schoolers who had their photos shared, and they were just, you know, young girls, or you know, media personalities in this building and all across Canada being used, their images to sell fake products, and it's, you know, or sell products rather, and it's hard to tell that they're fake sometimes.
Yeah, Laura, do you think we need tougher laws on this?
It's a bit of a runaway train right now, and I think we've seen politicians grapple with how to handle technology, and I think we've seen kind of the blowback too that's become of this with, you know, what the Liberal government tried to do with social media, and when they kind of weigh into to media landscapes, there's a lot of pushback from that. So it seems like a really difficult thing to do. It does kind of seem like the cat's out of the bag at this point. But I do think there are, you know, this is being floated in the United States. I'm sure this is something that Canadian politicians will be discussing as well. And I think the onus has to be put on the person sharing the images too, right? I mean, it might be easy to click a button and think that there's no consequences for this, but there has to be education about the harm that this can cause to people, as Carmen talked about, not just celebrities, of course, but regular people, and particularly children. So I do think that this has to be tackled at some point. I'm just not sure how to go about tackling it.
Okay, let's bring up a statement before I go to you, Goldie, which X posted regarding this matter. It says, posting non-consensual nudity, NCN images is strictly prohibited on X, and we have a zero-tolerance policy towards such content. Our teams are actively removing all identified images and are taking appropriate actions against the accounts responsible for posting them. Goldie, does that go far enough?
You know, I think this is the challenging part. You know, I agree with everything that was said, but when we're looking at AI, it's sort of like the wild, wild west when it comes to, you know, intellectual property law and just social media and, you know, that kind of law in general, because that policy, I agree with it 100%, but at the same time, this was an AI image, right? So this wasn't actually her. But the challenge is with this new technology, and, you know, part of AI is that the more it's used, the better and better it gets. And so now we're getting to a point where we're seeing these images and these videos that are not of the person. So, you know, someone could theoretically claim, is this art? Is this fair game? You know, is it all that kind of stuff? Right. So it's an important debate to have, because I think ultimately, if it's damaging to someone's reputation, and I mean, for me, to me, that's just horrific that people are making these fake nudes and putting them out there. But if it's fake,
where's the line?
Exactly.
Yeah,
like could someone come back and say this is art? And so how do we circumvent that? How can we prevent that and make sure that people are safe? Because if we let this go on, I just think it's horrible.
Yeah, and you know, we've got an interview coming up, a really fascinating interview that we shot already with Jeffrey Hinton, who is known as the godfather of AI. He's at the forefront of artificial intelligence. He was at Google for a very long time, and now he's left, and he's warning about the dangers of AI.
Yeah.
And really, we got to slow this technology down. But I want to pick up on something you said about the Winnipeg case and about children in this equation. I see some parents protecting the image of their child. They wouldn't post that on Instagram, Facebook, etc. What do you make of that, and do you think parents have a role here?
Sure. Listen, I post my kids online, and my family and friends, that's my way of keeping them in the loop on what they do. And sometimes I think maybe I should be more careful. And I think, to your point, Travis, that there are more implications to this AI technology rather than just, these fake images. There's implications on the livelihoods of artists and writers, on, data collection, on surveillance. So it really is so widespread. Hopefully there are brighter minds that are putting, their attention towards trying to fix this problem. And I'm sure there are.
I think we also have to remember that, social media platforms are free for the user, but it's not actually free because their currency is data collection and gathering information. So when we're posting pictures up there, whether it's ourselves or, children, for example, they're gathering that information. They're collecting the data. Who knows what they're doing with it, right? So it's a very fine line. And I think especially when it comes to children, if we're posting pictures, without their consent, for example, what sort of social or digital image are we setting up for them in the future? How's that going to impact them down the road?
I got to run to topic 2 here. So Laura, I'll let you weigh in on this one first. But that is BC is making moves to restrict cell phones in schools as part of an effort to protect youth from online threats. Here's BC's Premier.
It disrupts the flow of the classroom. It interrupts kids while they're learning, making it difficult for them to get back to where they started. And even more troubling than any of this, the companies that run the apps that are on these phones, their interest is not in protecting our kids. Their interest is in keeping our kids online, engaged in their apps with ever more extreme content, so that they can serve them ads, so that they can make money for their shareholders.
Okay, Laura, let you weigh in first here. Do you think this is going far enough? Do you think this is going to make a difference?
I think I need a cell phone ban, Travis. My 2-year-old points to my phone and says, "Mama." Anyway, well, look, I think that this is something it's being discussed in Ontario too. There's a policy here. I think that parents are asking for it. They don't want their kids to be distracted, but it's such a feature of modern day life. How do you impose a complete ban on it? I'm not sure that's feasible, because I can also see parents saying, look, I want to reach my kid. I want to be able to ask them things throughout the day or point them to something. So I think there's a lot of exceptions that can be instituted. I think, as a blanket kind of rule to limit it, I think that would have widespread support. I'm just wondering in real world how it would actually work.
And Goldie, it can also be a tool for safety, can't it?
Yes, but in 2019 we implemented a cell phone ban in schools, but with exemptions, right? So there's exemptions for educational purposes, there's exemptions for safety or health or medical reasons. So it's not a blanket ban, and the world hasn't stopped in Ontario. In fact, we're seeing the kids' scores increasing in math and English and science throughout the curriculum. So there is a precedent which our government set back in 2019, we grew up without cell phones. We were in school without cell phones. Our parents couldn't reach us 24/7. Thank God they couldn't, because now, now if my mom calls me and I don't pick up, within 5 minutes, she's like, "Is Goldie alive?"
Yes,
right?
So,
I don't think it's a bad idea. I think it's a good idea. It's working in Ontario, and BC has said that they will have exemptions there for learning purposes or health and safety. So I actually think it's a good thing. Let's allow kids to focus on learning.
So I'm going to take a different tack, because my oldest is 11. She's in the Toronto District School Board public school, and I've given her a phone for the first time because I want to be able to talk to her after school to arrange pickup. in her school, she can't use her phone. She has to keep it in her locker or in her backpack. You can't use the phone during class, and that's the appropriate, use of cell phone in school. Don't use it during class time. I think a ban is kind of a lazy way to put in place the proper policies to teach our kids the right way to use a cell phone in a practical way. Like in real life, when you're at a meeting, you don't pull up your phone and start going to Instagram.
Some people do.
You're supposed to know
Speaking
better.
from experience?
Well,
right? So we should be focusing on teaching kids the appropriate use, when they're supposed to use it. We should also be giving teachers the tools to enforce and supporting them when they enforce those cell phone policies within their classroom and have consequences for kids who don't follow them.
Okay, but is this putting the onus kind of on the teachers then?
I think that's what's happening in Ontario right now, and I think that's why the TDSB is kind of thinking about going a step further and making it more kind of across the board, more of a ban.
Right.
But then again, I think that there's parents want to weigh in, and so I just think that you're always going to be poking holes in something that's absolute. So I think as a concept of imposing limits or teaching kids when it is or is not appropriate to use it, I think that's the way to go. But I don't think you're ever going to tell a kid to, especially in high school, not to bring their phone to school.
You got a toddler, right? Are you going to give him a cell phone when you get?
I don't want to think about it.
Sorry, so is BC saying no phones allowed in the school, or they can't be used during classroom?
They can't be used in the classroom, like they're restricted.
But they can still bring it in, use it during recess or after school.
There's a lot of
social media.
There were a lot of details as well in the decision. So that's part of the issue as well.
They should look at what we're doing in Ontario.
Well, get your phones out because we got a commercial break
I
here.
left mine in my purse.
Scroll whatever you need to scroll. Coming up, we'll meet back here at the intersection on Canada Tonight. Our panel will discuss the Barbie movie. Should Margot Robbie and Greta Gerwig have gotten nominations? And we'll talk about that big Trump judgment in the defamation case in New York. It's all coming up on Canada Tonight. We can get our cell phones out now. Are we? Okey-doke, welcome back to our intersection panel here on a Friday night on Canada Tonight. We've got Goldie Gumari, progressive conservative MPP, because I think last segment I said conservative MPP, Laura Stone with the Globe Mail, and Carmen Wong with Kapow Communications. Let's talk about Donald Trump now. I know some people don't want to talk about Donald Trump, but I mean, you know, this $83.3 million fine that he's going to have to pay in this defamation case. Do you think it is going to make a difference to anyone that is supporting him right now, or the way he campaigns?
No.
No?
I actually don't. No. I think he'll use it to his advantage. In fact, like it will only further rally his base. He'll talk about, you know, the system being against him. He'll make remarks about this woman. Like I just think that I don't want to sound like a nihilist, but I don't think anything matters that he does. I think he's got it sewn up with his supporters.
Are there any rules for him? Are there any guardrails that are set up for him when it comes to this campaign and what he can and cannot do, or no?
I don't know why you're looking at me. I'm not American. I'm a provincial politician in Ontario, but sure.
But a Canadian politician.
Okay, a Canadian politician.
Wouldn't get away with something.
You know, well, I mean, the only rules he has are basically whatever rules the Republican Party sets, right? So it would be up to them. I mean, if I had to make an educated guess, I would say that what he's going to do is he's going to use this, like Laura said, to galvanize his base and maybe make the claim that, you know, he's a victim of the institution or whatever the case might be. I mean, we saw it with not Iowa. Was it Iowa? Columbia?
Yes.
It was
Iowa?
the court case where they said he can't run, and then it was overturned. Remember, they said he can't be
Colorado.
That's the one.
Sorry,
that's the one. Yeah, Colorado.
There've been a couple. Yeah.
This is how much I focus on Trump.
Well, that's what I wanted to get to next, though, and it's kind of a little bit navel-gazing. But like, should Canadian media focus on this? He's looking like he's going to be the presumptive nominee. He couldn't be the next president of the United States. Canada has a huge relationship with the United States.
Yeah.
Like, where is the line for media on this? On too much Trump coverage, not enough? Because even like we've gotten feedback on the show. Oh, why did you cover that? Right?
Well, I mean, I think you do have to cover it. It is news, but I don't think in public opinion it matters. What he does, you know, energizes his base, supports what they want to say, but in the same way, it also supports people who don't like him in all the ways that, you know, for the reasons they dislike him. So I think, you know, you have to cover it, but I don't think it affects people's opinions that much.
I think people also have to realize, I mean, regardless of who's president in the States, the overarching policies that our country has with the United States remain relatively the same. It's not like every single time a new president comes in, there's a huge shift in foreign policy or trade relations between Canada and the United States. I mean, it's a big institution, and it's not just Trump. I mean, there's a whole set of politicians there, right? And so it takes time. And I mean, when Trump was president, was there a huge negative impact to Canada? The only thing I can really think
there
of
was the NAFTA renegotiations.
It was NAFTA, and it was the trade case. It was like, I think aluminum was.
Well, I mean, Jagmeet Singh says it's going to be a disaster if there's another Trump presidency, but we are going to put pause on this one for now and switch to a lighter topic, which is Barbie. The Barbie movie came into theaters last summer and swept audiences off their feet. Of course, here's a little bit of a look. Take a look.
Closer I am fine. Closer I am fine.
You guys all see it?
I did.
No.
Oh,
what? You haven't seen it yet? Oh,
No.
come on, Carmen.
What have you been doing? Raising three children?
Fans flocked to the theaters, and the Academy of Motion Pictures, Arts and Sciences rewarded the film with 8 nominations, but lead actor Margot Robbie and director Greta Gerwig were snubbed. What do you think about that? Because Ryan Gosling is not happy about it.
You know, I don't think the film directed itself. And to me, it's very strange that the film got so many nominations, and yet the director did not. I mean, you can argue about Margot Robbie or not, but I think Margot should have gotten a nomination as well. But I think it just kind of goes to show the challenges that sometimes women face. And I was reading about this, and some people were saying, well, maybe the film wasn't serious enough. Yeah. But you know what? I think it was serious in the message that it was portraying, which is that women are powerful. And I thought it was a fantastic movie, actually.
What do you make of this, and what kind of message do you think it sends?
I think the optics are terrible that this happened, but I'm probably going to get a lot of hate for this, but I actually didn't think it was that great of a movie. Like I
kind of with you on that.
Yeah, like I watched it, I enjoyed it, I had a few chuckles. I think aesthetically it was brilliant, and I think Greta Gerwig, I've seen her other films, I think she's an amazing director. And I haven't seen a lot of the other nominated movies just because life. But when it sort of dragged at times for me, like it was one of those movies I think had a lot of hype and a lot of the best parts you'd already seen before the movie. So maybe it was a bit of a letdown, but I just personally, I didn't love it, I guess, as much as I felt other people did.
Well, here's the thing. Movies are subjective, right? You just got two different opinions on whether or not Barbie was a good movie. These are voted on by members of the Academy. I don't agree that this was a snub. Like, Barbie got 8 nominations, including Best Picture and Best Screenplay. I actually think it's a bit of a disservice to center your focus around Margot Robbie and Greta Gerwig when you have people who have been nominated and acknowledging them, like America Ferrera, women of color, for Barbie, or Lily Gladstone for Killer of the Flower Moon, or even, you know, people who were overlooked, women of color, like Greta Lee, whose movie Past Lives was nominated for Best Picture. So, I mean, listen, I don't automatically equate when women don't get nominated or they don't win as sexism. I don't automatically think that's sexism.
Let's pick up on that. Do you think it's sexism?
I don't think it's sexism, but, and you know, I never said that the movie was the best movie. Like, I know there was a whole Oppenheimer-Barbie thing. Like, I was definitely Team Oppenheimer.
Barbenheimer.
But I was Team Oppenheimer for sure. Like, I thought Oppenheimer was a fantastic movie. But for me, it's just strange that it gets 8 nominations, and yet not one for Best Director. So it's like, how can this movie be good enough to have 8 nominations, but yet the director is overlooked? So to me, that was just a little strange in the sense that something doesn't seem right with that.
So
that's for me what it was.
Ryan Gosling said that, you know, he was, you know, great. He's glad that he was nominated, but he said that there can be no Barbie without Margot Robbie. There can be no Barbie movie without. Oh, here it is. Here's the statement. It's such a. I'm honored to be nominated by my colleagues alongside such remarkable artists in a year of so many great films. But there's no Ken without Barbie, and there is no Barbie movie without Greta Gerwig and Margot Robbie, the 2 people most responsible for history-making globally celebrated film. So, Laura, why isn't this sexist?
That's a brilliant statement.
You think he's still gonna go up and get the award if he wins it?
I don't know if he would protest or maybe dedicate it to one of them. I thought he was very good in the movie. I thought Margot Robbie was too. I don't know. I mean, I think it does seem. It seems like the awards are well represented this year. Again, I haven't seen a lot of the films. A lot of the films seem like smaller, more independent ones as well. So it doesn't seem like they went with kind of like the big name blockbuster directors, for instance, although they did too. But it just, some of the other women nominated, I haven't seen their films. Like, they look really interesting. So I'm not sure. I can't say. It doesn't seem like it is. Again, the optics aren't great. And I think that keen fans of the movie are really disappointed, and it was an extremely high-grossing film, right? So a lot of people saw it and loved it.
Well, that's the whole thing. Like, Greta Gerwig and Margot Robbie, they're going to be okay. Like, they brought in the biggest box office hit, made history. They're going to be just fine with their, billion-dollar box office hit.
Okay. You got the last word. Carmen Wong, Laura Stone, Goldie Gomari on our Intersection panel tonight. We thank you on this Friday night. We're going to be back after the break. And we've got an interview on our Spotlight segment with Avril Lavigne. Stay tuned. DNA evidence has helped police in Charlottetown solve a cold murder case from 1988.
Combining advances in DNA with some genetic genealogy work, we were able to identify one of the individuals associated to those profiles found at the crime scene.
Police say that led them to this man, Todd Joseph Gallant, now 56 years old. He's been arrested and charged with first-degree murder and with interfering with human remains. The victim, Byron Carr, was 36 when he was strangled to death. His body was found with multiple stab wounds. As Laura Meter tells us, his family hopes the new development in the case will bring them closure.
It's been a long wait for the family of Byron Carr. Many came to the police announcement. They'd been told about a week ago there was progress with the cold case.
It's like a weight being lifted off you. It's hard to describe. It's just kind of a release.
His older brother says Byron was well liked, but the 80s were a difficult time to be gay. People were not out. He thanked Police Chief Brad McConnell for sticking with the investigation.
Brad McConnell, especially in the later years, took this under his wing, and he did everything he could to advance the case on it. There's no question about that.
Advocates say there's been a lot of attention on Byron Carr's murder over the years, and it's been hard for members of the community who were sometimes brought in and questioned.
Whenever this case would get investigated again, whenever they would reopen this cold case, then it did have a cost on gay men in Charlottetown and in PEI.
The LGBTQ community says the case is an important part of history.
We've seen great change in the way that people treat LGBTQIA people. Again, I wish Byron's parents had seen this. I know all but one of his siblings is alive to see it, and that feels good. But it's really about giving Byron the respect he deserves and the family the closure on this case.
Sally Pitt covered the case for decades and says the fact that forensic evidence helped move the case forward is significant.
It's been a long 35 years trying to find some resolution for this, and even though it's still early days and it's just a charge at this point, it's a major step forward for them.
The family says Byron's parents thought about the case often. His mom died 5 years ago, his father 2.5 years ago.
It was always foremost on their mind. And the police did visit them on a number of occasions, and they were grateful for that.
Byron's brother is also grateful the case will now be heard in court. Laura Meter, CBC News, Charlottetown.
National Security Advisor to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, Jody Thomas, says India is now cooperating with Canada in the case of a Sikh separatist leader who was murdered in British Columbia last June. Trudeau claimed the Indian government may be connected to the death of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. Chief political correspondent Rosemary Barton sat down with Thomas to talk about relations between the two countries.
We know more about the American situation because of their judicial process. We don't unseal an indictment in the same way. They were a little more advanced. They were investigating conspiracy, were investigating a murder, and the RCMP is being very careful to ensure that every T is crossed and I dotted to have a successful charge, package, and prosecution.
And you think that will happen?
I do think that will happen. They are, of course, independent, but they have been working pretty diligently at this.
You went to India twice last year to talk about these allegations. Were you surprised that the conversations led to such a strong reaction from India, that they were upset with the allegations, that they, sort of retaliated in diplomatic ways against Canada?
I think the reaction was really unfortunate, and I think it's counterproductive because it's harmed the people-to-people relationship between Canada and India. We need diplomats there to issue visas and to execute programs on behalf of Canadians and Indians. And so I think the reaction was unfortunate. The size of it, yes, was a bit of a surprise. I think we're working back towards a healthier relationship.
You can watch the whole interview this Sunday at 10 a.m. Eastern on Rosemary Barton Live. Well, still ahead, we'll have my conversation with Canadian musician and musical icon Avril Lavigne as she prepares to hit the road to perform her greatest hits. The Spotlight on Canada Tonight with Avril Lavigne is coming up next. Remember that big hit? You might also remember Avril Lavigne's punk fashion. The Canadian legend is hitting the road this May to perform her greatest hits. And Avril says she'll be playing all her favorites on the tour and also will bring along some special guests. We sat down with her for a conversation to reflect on her more than 2-decade-long career.
Joining me now, Avril Lavigne.
What up?
I read a quote that you said, I was from a little town, Napanee. I didn't even know it was a possibility.
Yeah.
But it was something that I felt in my body. Something that I was going to do. You always knew.
Like, it's so crazy because I didn't even know what like Hollywood was.
Yeah.
In like LA, and I was just so young, and I just loved singing. So I did like the stand on my mattress in my bedroom with the hairbrush in front of. I had closet doors that were mirrors, and I was always like singing in front of the mirrors, and just like in my heart, it was like I just want to sing. I want to be up on stage, and I want to sing.
Chill out, what she yelling for? Lay back, it's all been done before. And if you could only let it be, you would see.
On the cusp of turning 40, Avril Lavigne's induction into Canada's Walk of Fame is a milestone. One that seems like a lifetime away from when she took her first steps into the music industry as a teenager.
Tell me why had to go make things so complicated. I see the way you're acting like you're somebody else gets me frustrated.
That first track off her first studio album, Let Go, would catapult her to the top of the charts here at home and around the world, making her an overnight international pop sensation.
I remember when I did sing with Shania on stage when I was 14. It was at the time called the Corral Center in Ottawa. Now it's the Canadian Tire Center. It's like this massive arena, like a walkout 14. I think it's like 20,000 people. Like, and I remember not only being like so excited to meet Shania and sing with her, it was so overwhelming. But the feeling that like it overcame me when I walked out on stage was like, oh my gosh, like I want to do this so bad. Like this, I really wanted that. And you know, clearly it, and then 2 years later I performed on the same stage in my own show. It's like, it's crazy.
It's a damn cold night. And trying to figure out this life.
All these years later, there is no doubt she has cemented her place alongside other great artists like Shania. With 50 million albums sold, 8 Grammy nominations, and a number of world tours already under her belt, she's getting ready to hit the road again with a tour later this year. Wherever her path takes her, though, small-town Ontario will always be where it started.
While I got to discover the world, I'm always so proud that through my music, people have discovered Napanee, Ontario. I know that coming out of a small town, a tiny little town in Canada, I didn't have any connections in the industry. I didn't know anybody. I don't know how it happened. The chances are so slim. So, like, I'm always thinking of that.
Fame, however, has come with its usual trappings. Privacy has been hard to find, and especially difficult during her very public separations from former partners, musicians Derek Whibley and Chad Kroeger. How did you deal with like all of the attention and people wanting to know all of these personal details about you?
It's just like a part of it. It's just
It's part
like
of
you
it.
just literally, because it's been since I was so young, I just like if I walk into like a place with a bunch of people, I just like kind of like go to the corner and walk. Or like if I'm like in at an airport and there's a lot of people, I'll just walk over to the side. It's just like you just like learn how to like be more DL and like it never bugs me.
Learn how to be more DL, I like that.
Yeah. Or it's like, oh, I have eyes on the back of my head. I can always feel when someone's looking at me.
A consistent part of it through the decades has been her fans. They've supported her through ups and downs, including her battle in the mid-2000s when she struggled to get a diagnosis and then fight Lyme disease, something she has raised awareness about. There was a period, where it was difficult for you, and I know your fans were very crucial in that time period. And they have been, throughout everything.
I mean, It's really cool, and there's some fans that have been around from day one, and they're always in the front row, and I know them by name, and I even have some of their cell phones, and we text.
No way.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. And that was like back when people had like fan clubs and fan sites and all that, and so yeah, I mean, I'm really fortunate to have an international fan base, and to just that my music and the songs that I wrote about, like what I was going through in the last 20 years, that people connected with the songs, and that they connected with me.
He was a skater boy, she said, see you later, boy. He wasn't good enough for her.
Healthy and happy these days, Levine is now eyeing another creative challenge, trying out her hand as a film producer, announcing plans for a feature based on her smash hit Skater Boy. Where do you feel you are in kind of this career journey? You've got, this huge chunk that happened really early on.
Yeah.
But you're so young still, right? There's so much more ahead.
It's crazy. Just had my 20th anniversary.
I know.
And I feel like I got another 20 in me.
Yes.
Let's go. And yeah, I just made wrote a bunch of songs, and constantly writing. We'll put new music out in the new year, and I have tour dates.
Yeah.
And a bunch of other projects and stuff, but yeah, no, at this point, it's all about just like having fun, and and I need to be passionate about it.
Congratulations to the next chapter.
Thank you.
That was great, and we wish her the very best of luck with her tour. Well, that is it for us here at Canada Tonight. For this week, we'll be back, of course, on Monday, but stay tuned. The National with Ian Hannamansing and all your top stories coming up next. They'll have a preview of Ian's conversation with hockey star Kia Nurse. She's an integral part of the inaugural Professional Women's Hockey League as a member of Toronto. That's next, right here on CBC News Network. Good night.